Good morning and welcome to episode 6 of Taking It Further. And today we're going to be looking at Kings, Chronicles and the Prophets. On Sunday the 15th of November, and I'll put a link to this sermon in the notes below, we were looking at a story from 2 Kings chapter 19. Which is part of the story of Hezekiah. And one of the things that you may have picked up is that as well as looking at this story from 2 Kings, we also saw that the same story is told in 2 Chronicles chapter 32. And if you were to skim back, you'd see that there was actually quite a lot of more of Hezekiah's story in the book of Chronicles. And also, again, with almost identical wording, parts of the story is retold in Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 36 and 37. And if you have a look at those 3 sections, so that 2 Kings 19, what did I say, 2 Chronicles, I've lost it now. 2 Chronicles 32 and Isaiah 36 and 37, you'll see that there's quite a lot of similarity between the two. And certainly if you've ever done a Bible in a year type reading program, and you've made it through Leviticus and Numbers, and eventually you've reached Kings, you've got through Kings, and then you've read the first part of Chronicles, and then you've kind of got past that first section of Chronicles, which is just list and list of names, and then you're suddenly struck with this idea that I've just read this somewhere before, because there's a lot of similarities between parts of Chronicles and parts of Kings. So why do we have Kings and Chronicles in our Old Testament of our Bible? Well, if you've seen this slide before in episode 1. Let me just explain what this slide is all about. On the left hand side you have got the Old Testament that you would find in your Protestant Bible if you were to open the contents page up, roughly split into the law, history, poetry and writings and the prophets. And you will see that Samuel, Kings and Chronicles comes in the history section of our Old Testament. And the prophets come at the end of the Old Testament, and they are listed, as I've said before, simply in order of size. So the largest prophet is first, length of book, and the shortest prophet in terms of the book is at the end. But if you had a Hebrew Bible, which is explained on the right-hand side, the contents are the same, but they are in a different order. And so what you will notice from this slide is that there's a 3-way split this time: the law, the prophets and the writings. And Samuel and Kings come into the prophets. They are the former prophets, but Chronicles, you'll notice, is right at the end. It's the last book in the Hebrew Bible, and it's part of the writings. And so they're not put right next to each other. And so and if you read Kings and Chronicles, you will notice that there are some differences. First of all, in terms of when they were written, Samuel and Kings were probably written somewhere around about 550 BC, during the Babylonian exile. So after the people had been taken into exile, at some point in that period in their history, Samuel and Kings was written, probably to demonstrate to the people that God hadn't abandoned them, that God hadn't been defeated by the Babylonians because the Babylonians were stronger, but they had been exiled because of their sin and their idolatry and their rebellion against God. Whereas the book of Chronicles was probably written after the exile, maybe around about 450 BC, or even later, at the time when the exile was over and some of the people had started to go back into the land. The temple had been rebuilt. The priests were in place. And there are many people that think that maybe Chronicles was written by Ezra, and as he was one of those people that returned. And so part of the purpose of the book of Chronicles was to inspire hope and faith for these people, the people of Israel who were now back in the land. The temple had been rebuilt, to inspire hope and faith in them, and to call them back to worship of the one true God. One of the things that you will notice as you read through Chronicles is it's very much focused on David and David's line. There's hardly any mention of what goes on in the northern kingdom. The focus is very much on David's line, on Jerusalem, and what goes on in Jerusalem, and the temple, and the priests and the worship that goes on in the temple. It's written in a way to kind of draw our focus to how God governs his people and how God's people relate to God. And so when you read, say you read some of David's story, and you notice that the focus is very much on the good bits, and quite a few of David's flaws are just not mentioned in the book of Chronicles, because it's wanting to focus on God's regular way of dealing with his people. The expectation is, from whoever it was who wrote Chronicles, the expectation is that you will have also read Kings. So you know David's good bits, you know David's bad bits, you know the same with Solomon, and you know all the other good kings. You know that they had their flaws because you've read that in Kings. You know their bad bits. What is happening here in the book of Chronicles is an interpretation of the event. So you know what the events were, and in Chronicles they are being interpreted. Now, about the prophets, I've said before that you've got some of the prophets were in the north, in Israel, some of the prophets were in the south, in Judah, some of them were early, some of them were late. And when we just read through our Old Testament, we get very little help, because, as I say, they're just listed from the longest one to the shortest one. They're not in order of date or anything like that. So what I thought I would do, and you can find a link to this below, is I would prepare a chart. It's 3 pages long, so you can stick it all together, but it's a chart. You basically have Judah down one side, Israel down the other, and a list of all the kings of Judah and Israel with approximate dates. Also running down the side, there's references to Kings and Chronicles. So if you want to know where you can read about a particular king, there's a quick guide as to where you might find that story in either Kings or Chronicles. And also the black rectangles represent the different prophets. So was a particular prophet a prophet to the north or to the south, and roughly which kings? And so you can fit as you're reading through the story of the kings, or you're reading through the story of the prophets, you can kind of fit the two together. Who was the prophet? Or when you're reading Amos, what was the context into which Amos was speaking? Was he speaking to the north, or was he speaking to the south? And what was going on in Israel at that time? Who was the king? And that goes from 930 BC, which was when the kingdom split after Solomon's death, right the way through. In Israel's case, it goes through to 722 BC when they were exiled, and in Judah's case, it goes through to 586 when they were exiled. And so I say the link to that is below if you're watching in YouTube, and you can download a copy of that for yourselves. Also, there's an indication with a little gold crown symbol next to the kings who were good, and the ones that have got no crown next to them, they were not so good. So that's a very quick summary of why we've got Kings and Chronicles, and also a help as to where the prophets fit in to the whole story. See you next time.